So our second video for this Friday is about risk and uncertainty. Why are we talking about that? It's an environmental economics class. It seems a little strange, right? This is a topic that you would see in a lot of finance classes. People are looking about, they care about the amount of risk in their investment portfolio and such. It's something that we think a lot about in environmental economics because all of these tools that we're talking about, and specifically cost-benefit analysis, we're dealing with uncertain outcomes. We're talking about things that are happening in the future, and we don't know exactly what's going to happen. And if anything, COVID-19 pandemic this year has emphasized that, right? We don't know exactly what's going to happen. Things like environmental policies have been affected in big ways by a pandemic where a lot of businesses temporarily close, where people are working from home instead of going into work, where consumption patterns are changing. It's these things matter when we're looking at the costs and benefits of a policy, and since we don't know exactly what will happen, it means we're dealing with uncertain costs and uncertain benefits. So we need to be able to think about those and have tools for analyzing them. The simplest one, and the one I want us to be comfortable with, is something called expected value. So an expected value is a weighted probability. If we think there's a 10% chance that pollution is going to kill someone, then we're going to use that probability. That 10% is 0.1, and the outcome attached to that probability is losing someone because of pollution. So as we'll talk about, we can quantify in dollars what people are willing to pay for a small change in the probability that they'll die because of something like pollution. So we'll take that amount, that value, and we'll multiply it by 0.1 to get an expected value of the lives lost for this policy. We can't assume that we're going to lose someone. If our best information tells us there's about a 10% chance that someone will die, if we assume that someone will die, that's wrong, right? We're definitely overstating what the benefits of getting rid of that risk would be. Likewise, if we just set it aside and we say, well, 10% doesn't seem all that likely, we could just ignore it, that would be wrong too. Because if we could get rid of, if we could have a policy that gets rid of this 10% risk of someone dying, that matters. And just ignoring it because it's a small probability, that gets us the wrong answer. Assuming that we would lose someone, that gets us the wrong answer. And so multiplying that outcome by the probability that would happen, that's called an expected value. We often have something like, okay, there's a 10% chance that someone would die. There's a 40% chance that someone would get sick. We would have morbidity, a non-fatal sort of health outcome. It could be a non-fatal cancer case. It could be chronic asthma or something that people get and they have to live with, but it doesn't necessarily kill them. So what we would want for an expected value is to take each of those probabilities, use those as the weights. So if there's a 50% chance no one gets harmed, so that's a dollar amount of 0 for no one getting harmed, no damages. We would have a 40% chance that someone has this morbidity, this non-fatal damage to them, injury to them. So we would have a value for that. And then we would have a 10% chance that someone gets killed. We would attach our value for that. And we would add up those three values that we came up with, 0, morbidity, mortality. That would give us the expected damages that we're going to have. And that tells us if we can get rid of those risks through a policy, that reduction in risk is this expected value of the damage that would occur if we don't get rid of the risk. So that's the the most important tool that we use to deal with uncertainty. If we have some idea of how likely something is, we can quantify that in terms of a probability, and we're going to use those probabilities to weight the values that we can attach to different potential outcomes. So expected value is an important way to deal with risk and uncertainty. There are both conceptually and sometimes in practice more complicated, perhaps more satisfying ways of dealing with risk and uncertainty. It gets quite complicated mathematically when you start talking about distributions of outcomes instead of just looking at central tendency. As I said, an expected value is a weighted average. So we're looking at the average outcome. But there are some things where we may care a lot about what happens in what we call the tails of the distribution. There may be kind of low probability events, but that we may care a lot about. And so with something like regulating nuclear power plants, for example, the probability of a meltdown in a US power plant is very, very small. But if a meltdown happens, the consequences are drastic. So we may think about that probability in a special sort of way. And so there are tools to try to think about these long tail, low probability sort of issues and how to deal with them. My advisor in graduate school at Vanderbilt was the founder of a journal called the Journal of Risk and Uncertainty. An environmental economist started a journal about risk and uncertainty because these are such complicated and interesting issues to work with, and so important to not just economics in general, but to environmental economics specifically. So for us, we'll be using a lot of expected values, not a lot, but that's our go-to when it comes to dealing with uncertain outcomes. But it's good to know that there are things out on the frontier as well. All right, thank you guys.